I don't know if you have any understanding what is the difference between Italian terms and anarchized the dominion in Prussian states of musical art. German directives. Did you know what purpose Italian terms or German dictates serve? In music, when you read the compositions, you don't. Well, they are there. I don't know why they're there. But at the end of the day, one is led into two problems when you are told, for instance, legato. Legato. German directive. I met a man once. Do you know what purpose Italian terms or German dictates serve? In music, when you read the compositions, you don't. Well, they are there. I don't know why they're there. But I said to him, I said, excuse me. I said, have you hurt yourself? I said, you've got a bit of a limp. Oh, he said, I'm sorry, so I've had a hip replacement. Yes, I met a man. A hip replacement. I said to him, I said, excuse me. I said, have you hurt yourself? I said, you've got a bit of a limp or a knee. Oh, he said, I'm sorry, so I've had a. I said, yes, that's why I limp. So, not knowing the full details, effectively, the problem that faces the musician is insurmountable when it comes to actually choosing a piano. I mean, do you know really what makes a Steinway? Or what makes a particular Bechstein sound like a particular Bechstein? Let me draw your attention to the statement made, for instance, by Benito Mussolini, one of the last emperors of Italy. Or you could say really the last emperor, really, before the end of the World War II and Victory Day, May the 8th, 1945, really put the tin hat. I can't remember exactly what happened to our friend Horatio, but certainly the peninsula of the North African affair was somewhat leaving our young Horatio, a very young Horatio, amongst babes and sucklings. That leads one to realize that had you been attempting to even sing Monteverdi's Vespers, you would soon find yourself flapping around in all this charm and modesty of encumbered ignorance at the sight of finding that there was not any Italian term more usefully employed as legato in terms of the piece of music which was not necessarily written by an Italian at all. And yet happily you're going and spending £10,000-20,000 on some Bechstein or some Yamaha or something. On the basis of, is it what you have found in history, or is it what you have been been told. And yet
hello, sailor.
let me draw your attention to the statement made, for instance. I'm going to start this by Benito. Consider Bellini. What is effectively the piano that came from Tuscany, beneath Italian skies, that travelled its way through the rigours of Viennese society, which was dominant before the affair of the legacy. Before
I'm going to start this.
Skies, which was dominant in society.
Start this.
Skies, or the legacy of Maria Theresa, the last effective empress of Austria. That leads, has anybody ever wondered why Napoleon Bonaparte never actually became, for instance, Emperor of Austria? Because if you've ever read about his sister, who was, as you know, Bacchiocchio, who was Contessa di Pimbiano in Italy. It's so much for the arts, and of course in Paris and France and so forth, that you wonder really why Mozart had such a terrible time when he effectively went there in 1778 and shunted around in the midst of the grandiose gestures of people saying, "Oh, well, you're Amadeus Mozart, aren't you?" And young Wolfgang would say, "Yes, that's me," yes, and inviting him to listen to concerts and things. Well, the French have always been a very sociable people. So you're waiting for this. I'll read it now. That maybe explains why Beethoven never sent the Broadwood back that was sent to him in approximately 1816. Approximately 12 years before he died. But unfortunately, either unfortunately he died, or unfortunate that he didn't send it back. Because if you think about it, there's some really beautiful Viennese pianos at the period with quite lovely woods. I mean, they say how many woods were gracing the broad. Oh, anyway, back to our legato. Let's take this, for instance. Here we go. Brand. What is Brand? From Timon of Athens by Fernando Rey. Copyright this seller, Fernando Rey. What is Brand? By Three Kings and the Third Monarch. Where is love? What is Brand ranking even so much as love? That describes brilliance by plenty, or by which opposite you already told what it is that this more truly lies that first mark ready avon Timon Athens der Fernando Rey schützt diesen Verkauf for Fernando. Yes, that take your past and discover as much as what is true, then that which is not, that prove the state to be dormant. That of not even this you may call once of even greater greatness. That explains whole armies of the few, to say the many, is by order of one breed, then that which they, why Brand, lay so forcefully, more accolade than to victory than it is merely to triumph. Where shows much me by grand patriot or monarch to be the worth of my accolade, by symbol to a mule. May win or lose in Far East War, or even Donkey Derby. By a symbol of state may be the measure of its border, by only its ruler, by a symbol of to the air, the parameter of space is measured by skittles more than borders. But for who truly lets rape and pillage, as would even call their kingdom by the parameters of empire? Das embarrasses them against Feiner. Feiner, for who would have such right to call such borders by brand who live by one measure to a less valuable peoples? Where brand whose dimension is as well as varied as the soldier of as astonished heart, as much as it is well graced by rule. By rule in some ignorance that you call greatness, yet may live by another name. It is never so much by brand as falls. Oh, I know I am not even a general that breeds. That brand is an impostor. That lays more your dream to waste. That for as much as one is surely much than to the many. That made it so repulsive who never had such but seen this field, nor would again ever so much live to know it. That is brand. Il general. Hello, sailor. Look, I resent to being called sailor. What is this sailor? I thought you would have respected after your presumed innocence in the affairs of state, that wants to explicate itself from the rigours of, shall we say, Roman emperor metamorphosis that led to one of the last Holy Roman Emperors of Austria in Leopold II, whose affair was brief. But why I resent being called sailor is never given but chase to the bear, that on being questioned why, I should reply as in 1900, I don't know whether it was after 7 o'clock or before it, but in Ludwig's later version of something which he wrote, was circulating a story that while a ship had been trapped in the ice, Nelson had seen and pursued a polar bear. Has anyone, but as by such legato, or by such misdemeanor, of trying to forge Italian terms on, for instance, Adolf Hitler, on Mussolini Benito's visit to the charity worker, Adolf Hitler, who was trying to assuage patriotic ties between people who could belligerently take up the cause of the National Socialist Party and do for Germany what UKIP always never really truly felt they could commit amongst a whole sea of squadded, contemporate navvies, conscripted to work amongst the thieves, who are called frequently by such rigours as names as Hello Sailor, and this is why I resent it. Nelson briefly returned to triumph after the expedition's return to Britain in September 1773, that suckling then, suckling now, and what do they call but sucklings, but mist it all up and hide its reverence or its truth away from serious men. Do they really take us all for falls. That by the Indies of the November of 1773, and Nelson sailing for the East Indies and arriving at the outpost of Madras, and incidentally, viewer, had you chosen the Steinway with as much reverence as you should have certainly taken Bechstein under your cloak and dagger of Italian sponsorship, be prepared that Madras, 25th of May 1774, which was my godfather Ralph Weaver's birthday, except that it was about 200 years too soon. That 25th of May 1903, actually, that Nelson and Seahorse spent the rest of the year cruising off the coast and escorting merchantmen. And then they try and say what a great person Admiral Nelson was. And then you go and choose a piano on the basis that somebody has told you, by a piano called a B something or an S something else, irrespective of the fact that it has dissolved the Austrian monarchy, disrupted the affair of Beethoven, sold England to the compromises of ignorance, and elected me. Well, sorry I call you sailor. Tell us about border. What is this? You want to explain what music has to do with border, the borders or whatever it is? No, actually it is brand, isn't it? It's brand. It's brand to be given nicknames which one doesn't appreciate, such as Horatio. But take 1773, when Nelson was contracted effectively to look at his future as a career merchant. And let's talk about being the seaman of the gesture, not of greatness, not stuck on some plinth, looking as if you're some guard of the whole empire of beyond border that commands and says what will be, but rather that looking towards from that November of 73, where the British outpost of Madras, Nelson and Seahorse spending the rest of the year cruising, and dispatched to carry the cargo of the ships of the company's money to Bombay, that disregarding the fact that he spent the rest of the year escorting convoys, wondering what the point was of escorting convoys, during which he continued developing navigation and ship handling skills. He was contracted, Nelson. You probably, not many people will know this. Where brand, whose dimension is as well as varied as the soldier of as astonished heart, as much as it is worth waste by rule. By rule in some ignorance that you call greatness, yet may live by another name. It is never so much by brand as force. Oh, I know I am not even a general that breeds. That brand is an impostor. That lays more your dream to waste. That for as much as one is surely more much than to the many. That made it so repulsive who never had such guts seen this field, nor would again ever so much live to know it. That is brand. Il General. Il General. Il General.
Hello, sailor.
Look, I resent to being called sailor. What is this sailor? I thought you would have respected after your presumed innocence in the affairs of state, that wants to explicate itself from the rigours of, shall we say, Roman emperor metamorphosis. He could have died in 1776. That's only 2 years before Mozart's mother died. But Nelson, in want of some real decent British music, which really was lacking then, never mind the quality of Il Pianoforte, that in 1776 saw a clear difference but in the paths of so-called English music, so differently and diverse from those attent on the listening to the great Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, who only 4 or so years later would be having, almost, it was never performed, but I believe it was sung by his soprano, future wife Weber, from the, you know the one, A Incarnatus Ace. And that is, of course, from his great Mass in C minor. And what does England put up but a raunchy lot of fireworks music or water music that only succeeds in having sailors dispatched almost floating down the River Thames in London amidst timpanis, whose conductors cannot hear them, and whose composers even complain that they have been put by the King's men in the wrong place. And they expect to call me sailor. Ah, what is it, this truth that brought this time from his 1776 consumption in that becoming seriously ill with malaria, and his being discharged from Seahorse in the March and returning to England aboard Dolphin. That Nelson was recovering by the time he arrived in Britain in the September 1776, and which was about to sail his patron, who was the controller of the Navy in 1775, basically, which was a post really which was not really given the title of First Lord of the Admiralty then, because you would have to be called a real admiral by history, as far as, for instance, they wouldn't call me sailor if, for instance, I had been given the title by any monarch of, for instance, lady or dame. But having said that, which sailed by Lowestoft and stuff of blockers born on squalor, that had effectively 3 wars turn ashes, not into the greatness that occupies the pitches of cricketry, that sends England scuppering before India, on its bended knees, hoping to win at least one game, and failing so dismally by the end of any number of matches to not only gain the ashes, but to even escape with any dust. That effectively, whose little escapade was that same year as Mozart's mother died, and I weep, that at the end of 1778, the entry of the French into the war in support of the Americas, and you don't forget why America was becoming great. It was simply to distract the Georgian dynasty in His Majesty King George III, 1760 to 1820, from the sordid, horrible, dismal, Brexited past of French diplomacy gone down a Swanee in 3 Anglo-Dutch war, effectively caused through disparaging afflictions of opinion as to whether it was Louis who was in some respects hoping that the British would go to war with the Dutch. Who was that wonderful ship pilot, who was, that the British, somebody commented, they could not find anything really wrong with the guy to have a war about. But unlike that dismal failure in which her High Admiral Horatio Nelson attacked and created by some misdemeanor, the future of greatness of Waterloo was nothing in fact to do with the water at all. I mean, there was more water. There was more water in the sea. I don't think many people would doubt than there was at the Battle of Waterloo. However much the historians may go on and tell you about the mud that caused the defeat of the other side. Perhaps they had invented radar in 1815. No, nobody told me. So, I wish to, sir, to get the skin from my father, the skin off my bone, that breath makes me antipathic, is the word, is it? And it makes me bordering anticipate. If I'm going to be assuaging borders at all, it is not by being as bland as some. And that is about brand, is it? Brand. It's not about life, is it? It's about human nature. Yes. That the island of Nevis and marriage Nelson visited by 1783, by which time the affair with Mozart and Weber, their adoring future wife, was well anticipated, and as much he was shunning the scourge that he reflected on those effects of over-expecting too much courtesy from his father, at such recklessness of marrying so high a soprano, that how would Mozart, even as much as they fall down on their knees and call him Wolfgang, would raise as much money by 8 attenders to his funeral in approximately 1791, graving the stones, to pay their homage at his graveside, as much as be able to even put their name to any slate of remembrance, than as much so many who did not attend that cemetery, more reflected the truth about the greatness of a musician when you are born into having to read Italian terms, when they should, of course, all be in German. Or now, hundreds of years later, you should not be looking for a Steinway. Oh no. You should not be looking at Mozart or Mussolini or the Legato or the swimming trunks of Lord Horatio Nelson. Perhaps you would in fact look to the assuaged Castalians of tribulation which had the marriage registered at a fig tree church in John's Parish on Nevis. Oh yes. When Nelson returned to England, shortly before the end of his tour of duty in the Caribbean, that had his marriage registered at the Fig Tree Church in St. John's Parish, with Fanny following later. And Nelson returned to England. And they wonder why France was in fact so aiming, as it were, for a stake in the Americas, that it really spent beyond its purse, beyond its measure of French, beyond the Latin equivalent of Il Duce. But by 1793, Mozart had been buried 2 years, and Nelson sailed as part of a division under the command of Vice Admiral William Holton. But it should be noted that as arriving at the port in Toulon made their way there, that there was nothing in English history that could equate anything to do with Italian beauty, to even so much as Austrian architecture, that had by Toulon the forces of the Republicans and the control which royalists was threatened by forces of national convention. I mean, what do they expect short of supplies and doubling the ability to defend themselves? I mean, you wonder that we would take it under the protection. Nelson could carry dispatches to Sardinia and Naples requesting reinforcements. And they have the cheek to turn round and say, I'm sorry, we can't sing the soprano part from the great Mass in C minor because we don't know which section it's in. No, you want to know about border, don't you? You want to know about bombarding history with the future pathos that not only had Waterloo nothing to do with the sea in 1815, but by the time you got to the Crimean War in 1853-6, they truly wondered why, in all the history of humanity, since the birth of almost any kind of god or goddess or victim of the sea or pathology of, for instance, that person who was in the Dardanelles supposed as some god to have their legs so abruptly spaced by the Dardanelles that who was referred to actually cause any trouble there was going to have to cope with not only the legato of Vladimir Mussolini, Benito Mussolini, but also was going to have to fight the fact that their Allied victory in the Treaty of Paris, which was the culmination of that siege of Sevastopol, effectively, was that the culmination of that Crimean peninsula in the Baltic Sea, was in fact going to be dictated, and it is well documented now, as most people don't know why the carnage that was created by the Allies ever took place. So the war which started in the Balkans and the Russian troops occupied the Danubian principalities and the Ottoman suzerainty, and now they're quibbling about border.